For almost half a century, the deeper reality of what unfolded behind the scenes of Good Times remained largely unknown to the public. For years, audiences only saw what appeared on their television screens, never fully aware of the complex dynamics that existed beyond the cameras. That long-standing silence has finally been broken, as Jimmie Walker has stepped forward and revealed details that have taken many fans by surprise. His comments about his co-star Esther Rolle have added an entirely new layer to the story, one that challenges the warm and familiar image viewers had come to associate with the show. What once seemed like a loving and natural bond between a television mother and son turns out to have been far more distant and complicated in reality. This revelation immediately raises questions that fans have quietly wondered about for years. What was really happening when the cameras stopped rolling? Was there resentment beneath the surface, unresolved tension, or even deeper emotional divides? Walker's statements have reignited interest in the series, prompting viewers to revisit old episodes with a fresh perspective. For many, it feels as though everything they believed about Good Times now deserves a second look. The idea that such a beloved on-screen relationship could exist alongside such emotional distance off-screen has left audiences both stunned and curious. Despite this new insight, one major question continues to linger. Were all those long-circulating rumors simply exaggerated stories that grew over time, or was there always some truth hidden beneath them? To understand this better, it is important to look at how these rumors evolved. For decades, discussions about the relationship between Jimmie Walker and Esther Rolle never truly faded. They didn't dominate mainstream media, but they quietly persisted in online spaces, comment threads, fan forums, and nostalgic communities dedicated to classic television. These platforms kept the conversation alive, allowing speculation to grow and take on a life of its own. Among the most common claims was that the two actors simply did not get along. Some people believed there was genuine dislike between them, while others suggested their relationship was strictly professional, limited only to the moments required for filming. These ideas were repeated so often that they began to feel like accepted truth, even without clear confirmation. Over time, the line between fact and assumption became increasingly blurred. The internet played a significant role in amplifying these theories. On Reddit, for instance, a single comment suggesting that Esther Rolle openly showed her disapproval of Jimmie Walker sparked an avalanche of replies. People began sharing their own interpretations, observations, and second-hand accounts, all attempting to piece together a narrative. On other platforms dedicated to classic sitcoms, similar debates unfolded, sometimes years or even decades after the show had ended. One user expressed disbelief that any supposed conflict became public knowledge, arguing that at the height of the show's success, Jimmie Walker was too important to challenge. According to that perspective, he was essentially the driving force behind the show's popularity, making any opposition seem almost futile. Elsewhere, discussions referenced details from Walker's own book, hinting at a more complicated reality. Some readers came away with the impression that he often felt targeted, particularly when criticism surfaced in public interviews. This perception only deepened as viewers began to analyze the show itself more closely. Many believed they could detect subtle signs of tension in certain scenes. Whenever JJ delivered one of his energetic performances or shouted his famous dynamite, some viewers claimed to notice small but telling reactions from Esther, slight pauses, changes in expression, or moments of visible discomfort. These were not dramatic confrontations, but rather quiet, almost imperceptible signals that, over time, became magnified in the minds of fans. As the years passed without any definitive explanation, speculation continued to grow. People formed their own conclusions based on fragments of information, often filling in the gaps with assumptions. Questions about ego, respect, and professional differences became central to the narrative. It is this long history of uncertainty that makes Jimmie Walker's recent comments so significant. Now at the age of 78, he has finally chosen to address the situation directly, offering clarity after decades of guessing and debate. At this stage in his life, Walker speaks from a place of experience and reflection. With nothing left to prove, he approached the topic with honesty and directness. When asked about Esther Rolle, he did not hesitate or attempt to soften his answer. Instead, he stated plainly that they were never friends. According to him, their interactions were limited strictly to their work on set. They did not communicate outside of filming, did not spend time together socially, and did not even maintain basic personal contact, such as phone numbers. For two actors portraying such an intimate family relationship, this level of separation is striking. For fans who grew up watching Good Times, this revelation feels particularly jarring. On screen, the Evans family appeared deeply connected, full of warmth, love, and authenticity. Their interactions felt real, making it easy for viewers to believe that the bond extended beyond the set. However, the reality behind the scenes tells a very different story, one defined by emotional distance, unspoken tension, and, at times, complete silence. Looking more closely, it becomes clear that this distance did not appear suddenly. Beneath the laughter and heartfelt moments that audiences cherished, something more complicated was quietly developing. Esther Rolle and John Amos were not just performing their roles. They were deeply invested in the message of the show. They wanted Good Times to reflect meaningful themes: struggle, resilience, family unity, and dignity. For them, the show carried a responsibility that went beyond entertainment. At the same time, Jimmie Walker's character JJ was experiencing a surge in popularity. Audiences were drawn to his humor, his vibrant personality, and his unforgettable catchphrase. Dynamite quickly became a cultural phenomenon, and the network took notice. As JJ's appeal grew, the show began to shift its focus, leaning more heavily into comedy. Storylines increasingly revolved around humor and entertainment, often at the expense of the deeper themes that had originally defined the series. This shift created a divide among the cast. While the audience embraced the change, not everyone behind the scenes felt comfortable with it. For some, it seemed as though the show was losing its original purpose. Jimmie Walker, however, continued to perform his role as written. He adapted to the direction set by the producers and delivered exactly what was expected of him. In doing so, he became the central figure of a version of the show that others did not fully support. Importantly, this growing distance was not the result of a single argument or a dramatic falling out. Instead, it developed gradually, shaped by differing perspectives and priorities. Everyone involved was working toward the same goal, creating a successful show, but their ideas about how to achieve that goal were fundamentally different. This raises an important question: what exactly caused such a deep divide, even when there was no direct conflict? The answer lies largely in the evolution of JJ's character. Contrary to popular belief, Esther Rolle did not have personal animosity toward Jimmie Walker. Her concerns were focused on the way the character was being portrayed. In interviews, she expressed frustration with how JJ had changed over time, becoming less grounded and more exaggerated. She felt that the character was being reduced to a series of stereotypes, which conflicted with the show's original vision. Esther believed that Good Times should present an authentic portrayal of working-class black families in America. Families who faced challenges but maintained their dignity and strength. While humor was always part of the show, she felt it had begun to overshadow the deeper message. As JJ became more cartoonish, with flashy outfits and exaggerated behavior, she worried that the show was drifting away from its core purpose. John Amos shared these concerns. Known for his serious approach to acting, he brought depth and authenticity to the role of James Evans. Like Esther, he wanted the show to maintain its integrity. He criticized the writing, suggesting that it increasingly prioritized easy laughs over meaningful storytelling. As JJ's character took center stage, the opportunity for deeper, more nuanced narratives began to shrink. This situation created frustration, particularly for Esther, who had never intended to be part of a show that leaned so heavily into comedy at the expense of its message. Meanwhile, fans noticed the tension, but often misunderstood its source. Media coverage sometimes suggested personal conflict between Esther and Jimmie, but her own words made it clear that her concerns were about the character and the direction of the show, not the actor himself. Norman Lear, the creator of Good Times, later offered his perspective on the situation. He believed that the distance between Esther Rolle, John Amos, and Jimmie Walker may have contributed to the overall tension. According to him, their lack of warmth may have caused Jimmie to withdraw further, rather than encouraging open communication. Instead of addressing their differences directly, the cast maintained a quiet, professional separation. There were no dramatic confrontations, but the lack of connection was evident. Jimmie Walker, for his part, remained focused on his work. He recognized the tension, but chose not to engage with it. As a young actor, he followed the direction given to him, delivered his performance, and avoided unnecessary conflict. From his perspective, he was simply fulfilling his role. What makes this entire situation so complex is that both sides had valid points. Jimmie brought energy, humor, and widespread appeal to the show, helping it achieve success. At the same time, Esther and John were trying to protect something deeper, the accurate and respectful portrayal of Black life on television. For them, the show represented more than entertainment. It carried cultural significance. Ultimately, the conflict was not rooted in personal dislike, but in differing priorities. One side sought to preserve the show's original message, while the other adapted to the direction encouraged by the network. Without a compromise, the divide continued to grow, remaining unresolved. As the series continued and ratings remained strong, the tension quietly intensified. It was not always visible, but it was always present. Over time, it reached a point where it could no longer be ignored. Behind the scenes, the atmosphere on the set began to change noticeably. Although the laughter on screen remained genuine, the reality off-screen became increasingly strained. John Amos grew more vocal about his concerns, particularly regarding the direction of the show. In a 2021 interview with Essence, he revealed that his departure was not voluntary. He explained that he had been labeled a disruptive presence due to his disagreements with the writers. Amos believed that the writers lacked a true understanding of the experiences they were trying to portray. He described ongoing conflicts rooted in fundamentally different perspectives, his shaped by real-life experience, and theirs influenced by a more detached viewpoint. These disagreements ultimately led to his exit at the end of the third season. His character, James Evans, was written out in a sudden and tragic storyline involving a car accident, marking a significant turning point for the series. Esther Rolle also reached a breaking point. Already dissatisfied with the show's direction, she became increasingly uncomfortable with its growing emphasis on comedy over substance. In interviews, she openly criticized the shift, expressing concern that the show was losing its honesty and emotional depth. After the fourth season, she made the decision to leave as well. Despite these departures, the show continued to rely heavily on JJ's popularity. Audiences remained engaged, and ratings stayed strong. However, something essential had been lost. The emotional core that once defined Good Times began to fade, replaced by a focus on entertainment. Eventually, Esther returned in the sixth season, but only after negotiating better pay and greater creative control. One of her key conditions was that JJ's character be developed in a more responsible and balanced way. She hoped to restore the show's original purpose, but by then, the overall dynamic had already changed. With John Amos gone and Esther returning under new circumstances, the chemistry that once defined the Evans family was no longer the same. The authenticity that had made the show so powerful had diminished. For many longtime viewers, Good Times no longer felt like the show they had originally fallen in love with, as the heart and meaning that once set it apart had gradually faded away.